Right. Good evening, everybody. I think we're going live. Hope we're going live. It's 5 o'clock. It's not crackerjack, but it's 5 o'clock. I'm Jeff Hailstone from UPL, and I'd just like to welcome you all to our first webinar on the subject of potato storage. The thinking behind this is to have a series of short 30-minute discussions rather than one big discussion, to give the opportunity to more of you to join the call and to ask your questions. So that's why we're going for a number of shorter webinars. So we've got further sessions on the next 3 Tuesdays, each at 5 p.m, and each covering different aspects of potato storage. And basis points are available for each one. These will be emailed out to you because we'll have your contact details. So there will be separate basis points for each one. And we'd encourage you to join all of them if you can. There'll be a bit of overlap between them, but we'll be covering fresh ground on each one. So hopefully you'll be able to attend them all. Each one's, as I say, only 30 minutes, about 20 minutes of discussion and 10 minutes if we need it at the end for questions. Although it would be good if you can just ask the questions as you go along, and we'll try to pick up on them as we go along. There's bound to be some overlap between each session, but broadly speaking, we're going to start with advice on dealing with crops that are still in the field, and then move on to crops that are in storage, including wet crops. And then in later webinars, we'll look at storage treatments, different storage programs, and cost efficiencies, etc. And we'll give more detail about what we'll cover in the later webinars, in social media and so forth. So we're going to cover various issues: high dry matter crops, bruising, drying the crop, temperature pull down, holding temperatures, disease control, etc., etc. But we don't want to be too prescriptive. We've not got an exact agenda, because we want you to be able to ask the questions pertinent to the situation that you're facing. So if you click on the Q&A box on your screens, put your question in there, and we'll try and pick them up as we go along. To answer those questions and to offer their advice, we have 2 highly respected and experienced panelists, well known to many of you, I'm sure. Simon Faulkner, founder of SDF Agronomy Limited, has been an agronomist in fresh crops for over 30 years, including all aspects of potato storage. And Adrian Cunnington, former head of AHDB's Sutton Bridge Crop Storage Research, and now providing specialist independent support on anything storage related through his business Potato Storage Insight. So let's get started. It's a relatively short session. Over to you, Simon and Adrian. We've got another difficult season. It seems every season's difficult. But can I just start, just to get the ball rolling? What are you seeing locally and around the country? What are the main issues facing growers and store managers as we sit here today? So I don't know which one of you wants to kick off on that.
I can start if you like, Jeff.
Great, Simon. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we've got a real mixed bag again this year, as most potato growers can relate to from years past. We obviously started off nice dry conditions, fairly much ideal for putting crops into long-term store. And then obviously the weather's changed as expected, and it's got very wet. Temperatures did drop a little bit a few weeks ago, but in fairness, I would think most people are fairly happy with ground conditions and temperatures of tubers in terms of harvest. It's just this drying period now that's very, very crucial.
Yeah.
So your storage techniques will have changed since you started storing, if you started sort of beginning middle September.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. And Adrian, what have you got to add from that, and what you're seeing maybe in other parts of the country as well on your travels?
I think that it's just the variability, Jeff, is really what stands out. I mean, some parts of the country have got on well with harvest, finished really on time. I suppose we're always aiming to try and get crops into store by about the 15th to 20th of October, and a lot of people have achieved that, which is good. But there are also parts of the country in the north and the west in particular where they're well behind and will be struggling to get crops out in ideal conditions or anything like acceptable conditions for storage, to be honest. So that is a real challenge for everybody to be able to deal with wet crops coming into store and dirty crops coming into store, particularly when it comes to dealing with ventilation, to get the heat out, because at the moment we've got still quite mild weather. I mean, we're certainly locally here 15 degrees today and forecast to go up in the next couple of days. So that's not good from a potato perspective.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a balancing act. I mean, if we start with the crops that are, that are still in the field, if they're going to be lifted in difficult conditions and they're wet going into store, then what are the key things that growers and store managers need to be looking out for, and what do they need to be doing to sort of dry those potatoes off most effectively?
Do you want to go first, Simon?
Yes, no problem. I mean, I think it comes back to the planning you've done sort of pre-season in terms of making sure your store is all ready to take these boxes in, if indeed it's boxes or bulk. Stacking patterns will be absolutely crucial to make sure you get good airflow using the same box sizes, so the pallet ends all match up, and probably now not trying to pack too much into stores. As soon as you start putting headlands on the end of stores, it does slow the drying or the drying process down, because air doesn't get through those end boxes as well as it does through the bulk of the store. And then just making sure you run your fans continuously and get crop dried as quickly as possible. I think one thing which is probably a benefit to the soil that's probably adhering to potatoes at the moment, it does actually protect a little bit from impact damage. The downside to that is it does mask diseases or pest damage and things like that, where the soil is covering that and it's difficult to see unless you're doing regular wash-ups.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the really important part, as far as I'm concerned, is getting air through the potatoes once they get into the store, and much of the hardware we've got is still based around overhead throw type of stores, which will dry crops, but it's not particularly efficient way of drying crops. We're pulling air through boxes, and we are reliant on air moving through the potatoes. But the difficulty is we can't force the air through the potatoes with an overhead throw store. So it does become a very slow process, and that is where time can be against us if we have got truly wet crop coming into store, or a lot of soil in the boxes providing resistance to the airflow. So anything we can do to try to optimize air through the potatoes is really important. We must get rid of short circuits, something that's been talking about for many seasons, but it's still really important in a year like this one, where we've got dirty and wet crops coming into store, to be able to force air through. And think about using things like sponge bungs, if you've got those available anywhere. If you can put those in to force air through a box rather than allowing air to just skim over the top or underneath. Certainly on the ground, on the concrete, you'll get a lot more airflow going through on the bottom slot, and it's worth bunging those up a little bit to try and put a bit more pressure on the whole system. Ultimately, we've got to try and put back pressure onto the airflow to make it distribute as evenly as possible. And if we don't do that, then it will take the line of least resistance, and you'll get dry potatoes in part of the store, but you'll also have a lot of boxes around where there's still wet crop in the middle of the box. And inspections are difficult in box stores, but it is really crucial to understand whether you're actually getting proper drying going on, or whether you've just dried the surface. So dig down into the boxes and do have a really good look to make sure that you're getting the drying that you need. Keep the fans pretty well flat out for drying purposes. You can turn them down a little bit on an inverter, probably no more than 10%. Will give you a little bit more economy out of the whole job, but ultimately it's the air that you need. And don't run inverters as low as 50 or 60%, because you're not going to get the amount of air you need to do that job quickly. And time is against you when you've got wet crop. You need to be able to get it dried out and get everything under control as even as possible. And that's a challenge. It's also a challenge if you're still lifting and you've got crop in the store that needs attention, because it's very easy to get preoccupied with what's going on in the field and forget about the crop that's already in the store. And that needs to have just as much attention, really, to make sure that you can get it dried effectively.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. So regular inspections, just at very regular intervals, and very thorough inspections as well, then, to make sure you're not missing any wet spots or hot spots, cold spots. And I guess the same as you would do for fogging. So you wouldn't put, if you could avoid it, you wouldn't have boxes back behind the refrigeration unit and so forth.
Yeah, probably not. But I think your stacking pattern will probably be already determined, so it's probably a bit late for changing too much on that. But I agree with Simon that leaving out the headlands, if you have got space or you've got a shortage of yield, then leaving out the headlands will help these stores work better. But I accept that might not be possible. If you have got a headland in across the end of a store, then at least put gaps into that headland every 2 boxes, about a 50 millimeter gap every 2 boxes is useful to allow the air to move across that headland and get into the main block unimpeded. Otherwise, it will again go around the edges and take air away from parts of the store.
Right. Did you have anything else to add to that one, Simon?
No, obviously inspections are quite difficult because you've got to take into account health and safety, and climbing up and over and top of boxes, which is where you want to be, and having a look in corners and so on is always, you've got to be very careful how you do it, because accidents will happen if not. But you need to try and have good access to as much of the store as possible, so you can look. The corners of the stores is where you'll see, and I think if you look in stores, you'll see how the air's moving, because quite often you see these big black marks just in front of the chimney. You can see where the air hasn't actually gone through properly. It's been hindered by the roof or something like that. So those are sort of things you can have a look at.
Yeah, and I know Adrian's saying that your stacking pattern's probably already predetermined, but I guess if it's even across the top, that's going to help. And if you've got decent head space, that's all going to help the air movement, which will help drying as much as it would help fogging later on.
Yeah, I think the other thing, Jeff, is to emphasise, if you've got access to any positive ventilation, if you've got wet crop coming in, then you need to be using that, even if it means moving crop twice to allow you to do some batch drying. But positive ventilation will be much to a letterbox system, or maybe even something like any form of batch system that's able to dry, like a Wetherspoon tent. If you've got anything as old as that. And the other thing to say is that any stores with plenums in will be more efficient than those without. So if you've got a plenum in a store at the back, that will help to cut out a lot of short circuiting. And some of the work we did at Sutton Bridge showed that adding a plenum to a store will double the efficiency of that airflow. So it's well worth using that.
Yeah, so I suppose when you look at getting these things right, it's obviously going to help with the efficiency of the fogging, but when you look at how important it is for drying a wet crop and generally managing the crop, it's a lot of opportunities to get payback to the investment, isn't it? And I guess those sort of plenum costs are not that expensive compared to some changes they might need to make. We've got a question from James Lee. He's just asking, because we're probably nearing the end of that part of it, but he's asking about, is anyone seeing tuber blight? It says, look to be a high-risk season, given the cooler temperatures mid-season, but I haven't seen any significant levels yet, which might be a good introduction to talk about diseases that might be a threat, including tuber blight and other things like pink rot.
I haven't actually seen tuber blight. I've seen pink rot this year. Quite a lot of that about, which some of the growers have rung and asked about, and they're worried and think it's blight, but it isn't.
Right.
I'm sure there is some blight around, as Jamie points out. It's been a season where we could have got it, but I am not really seeing a lot myself.
What's the easiest way to tell between pink rot and tuber blight, Simon?
Well, the pink rot's normally actually gone. It's actually quite rotten by the time you're seeing it in the field, and when you cut it, quite often you see this pinkish tinge appear on the flesh inside. And tuber blight, when it starts, it looks like a mosaic on the skin, and then obviously it deteriorates further, potentially in store.
I mean, would you manage them differently? Is there much you can do if you're in the store and you find it, or is it just a matter of isolating it from the rest?
Well, if you've got a bad patch, obviously you want to isolate it, keep it at the front, or even get rid of it as soon as possible, depending on the levels in there. But otherwise, you can't always see it. So that's why this airflow business is so important, to try and dry all these tubers up, and that will negate the spread to some degree. It's not going to be foolproof, but certainly it will help to a greater extent.
You can sometimes spot the pink rot if it's going through on a grading line, because the soil will tend to stick to those tubers, so it makes them a little bit more visible, even if you can't see them immediately. If you're starting to see tubers going through with a covering of soil, then that may be a pink rot affected tuber. I think the other thing with pink rot is that you've got, if you've got any quantity, you've got to dry it out pretty fast, because otherwise it will go to nothing, and then that starts to become a problem. And if it's in the back of the store, then it's even more of a problem. So getting temperatures down is important for anything that's going to sort of take up a secondary rot as well. So as soon as it starts to get infected with bacteria, then that's going to break down pretty fast. So reduction in temperature and plenty of air is really crucial for any high levels of disease. Hopefully we're only talking about isolated amounts of disease here, but I think something like pink rot is probably going to be around because of the wetness of last season. It seems to be associated with wet holes or poorly drained areas of the field, so that is probably not surprising that we're seeing that disease this year a little bit. And of course it's exacerbated by warm, moist conditions, which are the conditions we've got right now. So just be vigilant, I think, is all we can advise at this stage.
Are all crops equally at risk? Is there a varietal effect, or is it does it tend to occur on the same farms with regularity? What sort of forewarning can growers have?
I think pink rot's not particularly variety selective, so I think it's more of a general issue that's more to do with cultural conditions. Blight would be more likely to come into specific blight susceptible varieties, and you should at least know if you're growing something that is blight susceptible. But pink rot's a little bit more tricky. So again, just look out for it, and if you're seeing it, then get some advice as well as to how to deal with it, because it might need to be handled differently. And as Simon's already said, isolated to the front of a store if it's seen, so that at least you can move it out if you need to.
And more practically, talk to your customer, because quite often a lot of this crop was already planned to go somewhere. So if you speak to them, it might be that they can move it earlier or do something different with it, rather than leaving it till it's too late.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And if you're looking at a crop that's wet but also might have pink rot, and you want to keep the temperatures up to dry it and cure it, but you want to cool it down for disease control, how do you make the decision on temperatures and the length of time to keep it warmer before you drop the temperatures down?
Well, I'd still say the drying is still key, because if you dry it, because you're also curing the tubers as well, which is really important. And then you've got, I suppose, you've got to keep monitoring the store after that to see what effect you've got. But
so until it's properly dry and properly cured, you can't really be thinking about putting the temperatures.
You've got to be careful.
Down.
You've got to be careful.
But remember, your temperatures will come down anyway, because if you're evaporating more water, then you will be taking heat out just by the pure physics of the process. It will reduce the temperature, and whilst temperatures are up where they are now, then I don't think it's too much of a problem. It'll only become a problem if we get into really late harvesting in much cooler conditions where we get frosts or anything of that nature, and then curing becomes really, really important, because otherwise crops will be at risk of soft rot and such like.
And that could happen, of course, as we go forward. So that's something that the growers should be aware of if we start moving to cooler conditions in the next couple of weeks, I guess. Yeah. We haven't had any other questions yet, so let me just ask about dry matter content and bruising and handling. There was a big concern about it mid-season. Have those concerns largely gone away, or what should growers be focusing on when it comes to avoiding bruising and damage? Simon, do you want to have a crack?
Well, certainly dry matters were an issue, as you've mentioned, with the early crops. And I think if you look at Piper being a big variety, there was a lot of issues with Piper, with dry matter and just not being able to handle them without bruising. I'm afraid that is a trait of Piper, and it can be really difficult. And we in South Lincolnshire, we had a mixed bag. We had some crops that were handling badly and getting quite a lot of bruising on, and other crops we got up in good order. And most of the time it was associated with dry matter. So where you could keep the Piper dry matters to 20%, then in general we've handled them okay. As soon as they've gone to 22, over 22 and a half, 23 and higher, we've then had the issues. I mean, I've had issues with other crops as well, even with crops like Lenormand. They've I've had dry matters of 23%, and just can't do anything with them. Tried different harvesters, waiting for rain, and just been able to do nothing with it. And I don't think it mattered what harvest you had in, it's still bruised. But that said, there'll be people out there who said, well, I've had the normal crops with dry matters of 19-20% and still got bruising. So it's not clear cut, but certainly where you get high dry matter, it's normally associated with more bruising.
And if it was a bulk store, would you go as far as to not stacking it so high in the bulk store to avoid the pressure, or is that not really?
I don't think that's too much of an issue, to be honest, Jeff. I think there'll be some mitigation in that there will be soil on the webs with the conditions as they are now, so that will be helping to offset any bruise risk, but it won't necessarily remove it completely. Certainly, if you're going into processing store in bulk or a chip shop store or whatever in bulk, then I don't think I would necessarily be looking to change arrangements as far as depth of storage or anything of that nature. Don't be greedy, though. I mean, if you're greedy and you start putting them deeper than more than certainly 4 meters would not be a typical type of
maximum.
That would be a maximum for most stores. There are some bigger stores that will be a little bit deeper than that, but we have seen issues in recent seasons with quite high levels of dehydration, and that can bring in problems such as pressure bruising if you are if you are pushing the boundaries. Let's put it that way. So I think need to be careful about that, and particularly when we've got to use a lot of air for drying, then that of course makes the crop that's most directly in line with of that air, which is the crop at the bottom of a bulk stack, that is going to get a lot of airflow past it, and that's going to take moisture away from the crop, which we want it to do for drying. But to get the top of the stack dried, then we're still going to be taking moisture away from the crop at the bottom, and so there will be some imbalance between the top and the bottom of the stack in terms of dehydration, and that might materialize itself as some pressure bruising, particularly for long-stored crop, long-term storage. So it's not a perfect world, unfortunately. So I mean, we have to accept that some of these things are going to be difficult.
Balance,
and we've got to balance and manage the risks, because if we don't dry the crops, then we won't have any crop to sell, so it'll be irrelevant whether it's got pressure bruising or not.
Yeah.
That's where skin set in those sort of stores is really crucial, because you want to make sure they're good skins going into store.
Yeah. Is there much of an issue with excessive soil on tubers, or is there anything that can be done about that? And what are the risks if there is? And we've talked about the benefit of having some on there from preventing damage when it comes to fogging later on. I know a lot of the soil will sort of drop off as it dries, but is there?
I think the problem with soil in the boxes, or too much soil in a bulk store, it impedes the airflow. It's much harder to get the air through the crop. So it is a balance. I mean, obviously cleaning machines on graders will take some of the soil off, but you've got to be careful it's not too aggressive, so you're then damaging or increasing bruising levels. So you've got to manage it how you think fit, and you can't be too prescriptive. You just got to look at the current conditions of what you're doing and then react accordingly. But as long as you're doing hot box tests on a regular basis and trying to identify these sort of problems, you can perhaps manage them as you go along. Yeah.
Well, that's taken us, believe it or not, I mean, that the time has flown past. That's taken us to the end of our 30-minute webinar. We haven't had a lot of questions, so that's why we just sort of kept running, covering these various issues right up to the 30 minutes. So we've covered quite a number of different issues there. We haven't got into MH levels, natural dormancy of potatoes, monitoring for sprouting, and all of that still to come. Also energy use efficiency as well. So there's lots still to cover. If any of you have other questions, Keep putting them up, and we'll start the next session, which, as I say, is a week today, Tuesday at 5 p.m. Hopefully, you'll all be back. Tell all your mates. Hopefully, they'll all be on it as well. And we'll start off by answering any questions that come in that we haven't answered. We'll start next session on those, and then we'll move on and cover some different topics. So thank you all very much for dialing up and joining us. Thank you, Adrian and Simon, very much for your expertise and answering the questions and your advice. Adrian's not on the next one. Adrian's having a well-earned break somewhere exotic. I don't know, Boston or something like that, I don't know. But Simon is. So Simon will be joined by another guest, and I'll be here as well. So hopefully we'll see you all next week. Thank you very much. Bye for now.